Welcome to the Exhibit A podcast.
Welcome to Exhibit A, and we are glad to have Heather Poole, my good friend, I would say the very aggressive, proactive, maybe is a better term, immigration attorney. Heather and I have known each other for a long time, and she has graciously agreed to join us on our program. Hello, Heather. How are you?
Hi, Don. I'm fabulous. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I've been looking forward to having you on our program for so long. As you know, we booked and then we had to cancel, booked. It's been probably about 2 months in waiting, and we finally got you because you had no choice but to slow down, right? Just a little bit.
Yeah, the government is literally closed right now, but, they're still taking stuff through the mail. So we're closed to a little bit, but we're still as busy as ever.
Yeah, and before we start rolling here, we were talking about our respective law practices, and we are both still open. It's slower. The clients still need us though, and we are essential services because people still need to be within our legal system. So, and yours is so impressive. You got into immigration law outside of law school, and what I want to do is talk to you about how immigration law interacts with family law and answer a lot of the questions that my clients in particular have when they come in. Ever since I've been practicing family law, it seems like, there's a lot of people that come in and they ask me these questions and I can never really answer them because I'm not an immigration attorney. So you're going to be so valuable for us today. So let's talk a little bit about you, Heather. I did peek at your website, and what I know is that you've been a private immigration lawyer exclusively devoted to complex family-based immigration and U.S. citizenship law. This much I did know, because you and I talked about this a long time ago. You're a certified specialist in immigration and nationality law, right?
Yes.
Where did you get the specialization credential?
The State Bar of California.
Okay, so it's the same thing as when I got my family law credential. I thought maybe you had to interact with the federal government to do that.
No.
No, that's interesting. Okay, because you're really dealing with federal law, but the state certified you.
Yeah, well, we had to prove that we did all these federal cases, definitely.
Okay. You've been practicing only federal immigration law since the year 2000. So you've been practicing for 20 years, my friend.
Almost, yeah. Staying out of the sun and makeup keeps me young.
Okay. And the thing that I've known about you for a long time is you actually litigate. There's a lot of immigration attorneys that really process paperwork, which is nothing wrong with that. I would call that more of a transactional type of practice. But you are, like I said, the go-getter. You're the person that's going to go and try to save people and help them. What I've learned about you is you also have traveled, or you do travel occasionally outside of the country to meet people. Is that correct?
Not out of the country, out of the state. Unfortunately, the U.S. consulates have barred attorneys from even entering the grounds for years now. Apparently, they don't like us. So. But since I do federal law, I can travel all over the country for deportation hearings before the Department of Justice, immigration courts, as well as doing DHS hearings for green cards and naturalization cases for complex issues that clients don't want to go in there by themselves.
Interesting. Do you enjoy the travel?
Yes and no. Luckily it has died down a bit. So, I was averaging twice a month. I was seeing a lot of the United States on my clients' dimes, which was off, the positive. The negative was that, no matter how much I can work on the plane, I am still trying to make up when I get back.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's kind of grass is greener on the other side, but I always thought, man, it would be cool to be traveling around the country and all the old courthouses. You go to all these federal courthouses, right?
Federal courthouses and federal immigration courts, which actually don't even look like courthouses. Most of them are in office complexes or skyscrapers, so you wouldn't even know people are being deported there.
Okay, they're like administrative buildings?
Yeah, with church pews in front of a judge who's up a little higher than everybody else, and then 2 front tables, one with an immigration attorney representing a respondent. Then you've got the Department of Homeland Security, an ICE attorney representing the government, and then you've got a bunch of church pews behind you, and that's the courtroom.
Okay, how sexy.
I know, right? And uncomfortable.
Okay, all right. Well, when I started in law a long time ago, the feds were called something different. They were called INS or something like that, if I recall right.
Yes.
For this program's sake, what term should I be using for the agency that replaced INS?
Well, that's a tough question to actually answer because this whole split, INS used to be both enforcement and benefits. So if someone was applying for a green card or INS was trying to pick up somebody who was undocumented, it would be within the same agency. After 9/11, President Bush split them into two different agencies. The Department of Homeland Security has now ICE, which is a sole enforcement agency. And then you've now got CIS, which is US Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is your benefits agency. Though unfortunately they still all work together, but it's two separate agencies now.
Okay, you got to help me out. Is there some term I could use when I'm referring to both of them collectively? The feds. How about we say?
Okay, yeah. Immigration, yeah.
Immigration, okay. As long as I have your approval, I'm going to say immigration, okay? Okay. All right, so my first question to you is, how is COVID-19 impacting people with immigration issues?
That's a great question. Well, first, it was a bit chaotic, and honestly, it still is. Every day, the Department of Justice, which runs the immigration courts, is sending out Twitters to announce to people the closure of immigration courts because someone's been infected and they didn't know what to do about hearings at first. And so people didn't know if they should show up to the courthouse because it's very serious. If you don't show up for a removal hearing, you can get a deportation order in your absence. So there was a lot of confusion very early on. And for a while, the government kept everything open, and then it started closing one court at a time. And then I think 10 courts got closed. And then overall, the agency was saying, well, let's just stop non-detained hearings, people who are not already being detained by ICE, and just hear everything else. And then that got canceled. And so now the government in the immigration court setting has very limited hearings only for detained individuals, and usually set in May or later. But those times keep changing, unfortunately.
Wow, I didn't know that. Here in, you wouldn't know this because you don't practice in state court, but in LA, they declared that the courts aren't going to open up until like June 22nd, I believe it is. Did you get a similar notification from the federal courts?
Not really. It kept changing, and I think the middle of May now is for non-detained. Everything's been scheduled beyond that time. They've all been canceled, and everyone's saying you're going to get a rescheduled master calendar hearing. But on top of that, you've got immigration courts that are open just for the detained cases. And they're saying on a day-to-day basis, you can't go into Chicago because there was a COVID person there, or you can't go into this court or that court. So it changes on a daily basis, unfortunately.
Okay. It doesn't sound like it's that much different than any other lawyer practicing in the United States. Their local courts or their courts that they choose to practice in are kind of telling them mixed signals, or at least changing it constantly. Very, very unique.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So what about undocumented workers? Are they facing obstacles to receiving any kind of benefits due to the pandemic?
Well, the concern is that benefits are going to slow down. So anyone who's applying for naturalization, a work permit renewal, a green card, it's going to take longer for their cases to get receipted because there's less people working right now. The local field offices are closed to any in-person inquiries, but they do claim that the officers are, working behind the scenes and from home, and the service centers are still open, but we anticipate that it's just going to be slower and slower. So we warn clients, look, these are the posted ranges that Homeland Security has given us, but don't even expect it to be that. COVID has slowed everything down to a crawl.
Yeah. Okay, I want to kind of shift gears here. As you know, I'm a family law attorney, and I definitely want to get your input on some of the issues that we see. And I want to start off with domestic violence. Those incidents that we deal with a lot. Can you tell us, what impact domestic violence plays on people who have family law issues with restraining orders or criminal convictions or even administrative hearings?
Sure. Well, there are special protections for battered or abused immigrants under federal immigration law, but most of the time the people who come to me have never even heard of them. The first people they're coming to is someone in your position, a family lawyer, who may not realize that this person is an immigrant and may be deterred from filing for custody or filing for divorce or really arguing or even going into the courthouse, because all they've heard is what their abuser, their husband, has been telling them about what their rights are. So there's this misconception among immigrants that, you know, a lot of them, that you're going to get arrested the minute you walk into a family courthouse. You know, you're going to get deported if you tell anybody about the abuse. Your kid's going to be taken away because you're not a U.S. citizen. I am. Very common. So it's really important, I think, for any family lawyer to be aware that these other factors could interplay with whether this person is going to agree to the strategy that you want them to do. And also to work with an immigration attorney to see if there's something we can do to protect that person's interests, even if we do it in private and confidentially, so the abuser doesn't know about it. So it gives the abused immigrant some hope and some, I wouldn't say guts, but encouragement to go through with the family law strategy. So, and another concern that a lot of immigrants have is, well, you know, the family law judge is not going to listen to me. He's not going to give me custody because I don't have legal status. Do you think in family law that that's really an issue to judges?
Well, that was one of the things I was going to raise here. So absolutely not. The judges don't care at all about what's going on in immigration. I'd say that they'd be very offended if that information came out. A little bit later, I'm going to talk to you about these people that like to make those threats, because that's something that's very common. So in our cases, when a woman is, or a man is a victim of domestic violence, does it do anything that extends their time here in America, or potentially before, you know, let's say that they're undocumented and they're the victims of domestic violence? What could happen positively to them here with regard to their status?
Well, as you know, a lot of, let's just use to make it easier, say a woman is in this situation. A lot of women are afraid to go to the police to talk about the abuse or report it because they're worried they're going to be deported. And I encourage them, if they come to me first, look, if he's being physical to you, you don't need to stay just because of immigration consequences. There's this great federal law under the Violence Against Women Act that if you are married to a permanent resident or to a U.S. citizen, and that person has been abusive to you, which can be any combination of physical, financial, or psychological abuse, and you can prove that you've lived with that person and you can prove what their status is, then you can get your green card, even if your abusive husband doesn't want to file for you because he knows the minute he does, you're going to leave him because that's the only thing, you know, the only reason you're staying there. And this can all be done confidentially. Even USCIS officers can't tell the husband, if you were to call up the 1-800 number or call ICE and say, my wife is undocumented, you should come get her. They can't tell him whether she's filed anything for her own protection. It's in the law. They are civilly and criminally liable if they disclose anything to an abuser once she's filed one of these cases.
Nice. That's good to know. Something I could pass on to my clients. Let's talk about the accused. Okay. You know, I've had several cases where people have been involved in domestic disputes. One person calls the cops. There's no serious injuries or any injuries at all, but there is some evidence that there's been maybe some pushing and shoving. What are the possible consequences to a person's immigration status if they get accused of domestic violence?
Well, first and foremost, they can get possibly exposed to ICE, right? If there's if it leads to a conviction or if it's a serious kind of incident, then ICE can be alerted by the local sheriff or the police department that this immigrant is in their detention. And that's the whole concept of sanctuary cities. Usually LAPD doesn't refer to ICE unless there's a conviction or, you know, and the person served their time, they got picked up again, or it's a serious kind of violence that's occurred because, you know, nothing's been set yet in a court of law. But, you know, that's one of the reasons immigrants are you know, afraid to come forward, because they're worried about what the police will do. And especially, you know, they come from countries where the police just cannot be trusted. So it's really hard for local police officers here to get the trust of local immigrants. But I encourage my clients that, look, if your husband's abusive or even your boyfriend is abusive to you, you know, call the police, if you cooperate with their investigation, even if you're not married to your abuser, they may be willing to sign off on a certification for a different type of relief under the Violence Against Women Act called the U visa. It's for a victim of violent crime. And this can be somebody who's a victim of domestic violence, felony assault, lots of rape, lots of different physical violence. So even for somebody who doesn't have, whose abuser doesn't have legal status, there's some options, right?
Okay.
So, but domestic violence itself, a conviction is not necessarily going to be an issue in someone's application for a green card unless it falls within a statutory good moral character period, which will depend on the type of relief that they're applying for. But if someone is a permanent resident, then it gets much more complicated, and they can be potentially deported if they're convicted of a domestic violence conviction or violation of a restraining order. So immigrants need to be very careful, especially with some of these tricky abusers who, you know, say, oh, I just want to talk about the kids. I need you to show up here or this is going to happen. And then they trick her and they call the police and say, she just violated the restraining order, arrest her, she gets conviction, she gets put in deportation.
Okay. So is there any difference in the law with regard to people that are accused of domestic violence versus people that suffer convictions? So in other words, let's say that this woman that I was talking about, she's pushed her husband. There's no injuries. Okay, the husband doesn't want her arrested, but the cops come by, get the story, and they place her under arrest. It goes in front of the DA. The DA says, I'm not charging this. There's not enough, you know, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But somehow the ICE, I guess, learns about this arrest. Is that arrest going to be something that they're going to be concerned about?
Now, she has to have either admitted to the essential elements of the criminal charges, even if they're later dismissed, in order for it to affect her immigration case, or it has to be an actual conviction.
Okay, that's really good to know. I've been asked that question so many times. You did mention something, though, about restraining orders. And
yes.
Obviously in family court, we apply for what we call domestic violence restraining orders. And it's different than the criminal world. You know, in the criminal world, they issue these protective orders.
Right.
Let's assume that the DA refuses charges, but the husband goes into court and he seeks and gets a restraining order in family court. Is that something that ICE could be concerned about?
No, because it's not criminal. However, if there's a violation of the restraining order and she's criminally charged for that, then there's going to be a problem.
Okay. It looks like the criminal charge is kind of a key part of this, if I'm hearing you correct. Well, let's say that the woman is criminally charged and her defense attorney whispers in her ear and says, when we go up there, I don't want you to plead guilty. What I want you to do is just say no contest. Okay. Okay. And they're going to treat this like a guilty thing, but it's different ramifications in most civil cases. How will that play out in immigration land?
Well, if it's still a criminal case and she pleads no contest, it's the same thing as pleading guilty for immigration purposes.
Okay.
And also the whole act of admission that I was talking about, that can count as a conviction for immigration purposes. So our clients have to be very careful what they admit to on the record. Okay.
Let's change topics a little bit, and that is how getting a divorce is negatively impacted by a person's, strike that. How is a person's ability to remain within the United States affected when people are getting a divorce? And we've already talked about these people that threaten. And I'm going to tell you, you just took the words out of my mouth. There's so many cases that I get where, you know, he's telling me that he's going to call immigration. In fact, I've had some clients say, can I do that? And of course, I'm telling them, look, it's going to be negative on you, man. They're not going to do your phone call. But realistically, though, if you get some disgruntled spouse, and they pick up the phone and they call ICE and say, guess what? My wife who lives at such and such Alvarado Street in the city of Los Angeles, and she's here illegally, what's going to happen? I mean, are they going to respond to that?
Oh, that's impossible to know, unfortunately.
Okay.
Under the last administration, President Obama actually had a priority list for ICE. You know, these are the people that you should go after in this order. And it was focused around people who had recently come into the United States illegally, had severe criminal convictions, had served their time and were still out, and people who had prior deportation orders. When President Bush got into office, he took off the priority list completely. So there's no known priority list for ICE, and we have no idea who they're targeting and when.
Oh boy. So it could be something really benign like that, and they could come swooping in and picking up some lady that's been here for 20 years and, okay. All right. I get the picture. All right. Deportation on families here in the United States. I know that you've seen it all. You had to have within 20 years. What impact does deportation have on families where they're here in the United States? I mean, I see on the news a lot of times that there's folks that are subject to deportation, and they were essentially here since they were 1 year old. They're 20 years old, married, they've got kids, or 25 years old or whatever. What is likely to happen to the family under those circumstances?
Well, that's another misconception that a lot of, Americans don't realize, that just because you have a U.S. citizen child does not mean that you're protected from being deported, or that the immigration judge is going to care that you have a U.S. citizen child and he's going to be separated from his father or his mother for the rest of their life. Congress intentionally, when they drew up new provisions that were some of the most horrible and penalizing provisions of the Immigration Nationality Act back in 1996, including the permanent bar and the unlawful presence bars and the lifetime misrepresentation bars, these horrible things, they intentionally left out the fact that someone has a U.S. citizen as a way to qualify to waive these things. So the whole anchor baby syndrome, which is what, it was all political, how this was all amended, has really taken, a horrible impact on people. They don't realize, it doesn't matter that someone was brought here as a baby. We call them your DACA student now, right? Who's has no criminal history, was maybe not even told by their parents until they applied for a driver's license or college that they're here undocumented, and their parents were just brought them here, against their will. They were a kid. And now they have no options, and mom or dad's in removal proceedings, and or the DACA kid's in removal proceedings, and he's got no options. He has to go back. There isn't sympathy built into immigration law, unfortunately. So what we're always trying to do is find, a category that you can fit into. If there isn't one, then there's always going to be cases where there's nothing we can do.
Can you name the categories?
Sure.
Small ears.
Yeah. So immigration law is based on either an immigrant visa or a non-immigrant visa. An immigrant visa is a way to get your green card. It's a permanent visa. And you can get that usually through family-based sponsorship, but there's only limited categories. So a U.S. citizen can sponsor a spouse or parent, a brother, sister, or a child. Okay, there's no sponsorship of grandma, aunts and uncles, cousins, none of that. A permanent resident is even more limited. They cannot sponsor a brother or sister. They can sponsor a parent. They cannot sponsor a parent, and they cannot sponsor a married child. So you have to fit into one of these categories if you're going to be filing through family. Another way is through a permanent employment offer, which can be very difficult to get because you have to prove in most circumstances that you are very highly skilled. There's no U.S. citizen workers who are qualified for the position that you're going to be filling, and that the employer, has enough money to be able to pay your wage, and then some. And these cases can take a long time. And then the other main way is through political asylum. That's where you're afraid to go back to your country of origin because you fear that you're going to be persecuted based on, again, a particular category. You have to fit in one of 5 categories, which includes membership in a particular social group, your political opinion, your religion, national origin. So if you don't fit into one of these categories, then you're out of luck. And the Immigration Nationality Act is so complicated because it's been amended so many times in the last 130 years. There are these small other ways to get it, to get a green card, but those are the main ways. That, or unless you have $1 million in your pocket and want to invest in a U.S. Either existing employment or want to start your own business and can guarantee that you're going to employ 10 U.S. workers. But even the EB-5 category, which is the $1 million green card category, is years backlogged now. So even if we have immigrants who are rich and want to invest and create U.S. jobs, it's very difficult to do so.
Wow. Holy cow. That is very surprising to me because it's always been from what I've read, a priority to get these people into the country that want to bring their money with them and their companies and things like that. Wow.
Exactly.
Okay, well, you just said something about sponsoring people, and my mind went straight to these people that meet folks overseas, right? The citizens here,
Yeah.
the mail order brides, as they used to say. Go to Russia, get yourself a beauty, come on back. That's called. In order to do that, they have to sign affidavits of support, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And there's some consequences that go along with that declaration or that affidavit they sign. Can you talk a little bit about what would happen if things don't go well when they bring people over?
Sure. So in the situation of someone sponsoring a fiance or spouse, they're going to have to file the affidavit of support, which is a contract with the federal government that says you are going to reimburse us if your spouse ever goes on any kind of means tested public benefit, which is usually your cash aid, like welfare or Medicaid, non-emergency Medicare, anything, food stamps, anything like that would cause the government to dole out funds to this individual. So what people don't understand, and they're just signing this, and unfortunately immigration attorneys are not contract attorneys, and so if they know what they're doing, they should refer the person out before they sign this, they're happy, but they're in California, and the rates of divorce are pretty high here, and they don't like each other in a couple years, and she now has her green card, and he wants to get out of this affidavit of support obligation, but divorce does not end that. So she has to literally die or leave the country permanently or become a US citizen, which is going to be even longer if she's divorcing her husband, right? Probably at least 5 years. And then on top of that, the only other way to get out of it is if she's got 40 quarters of Social Security earnings that can be directed to her. And that's about 10 years of full-time work. So for that entire time, the US citizen spouse is on the line for the affidavit of support. But it can also work in other ways to the immigrant's benefit. If, I've seen this unfortunately in doing a lot of my VAWA cases where the US citizen is bringing over someone, marries them, deflowers them, uses them, leaves them, right? And then goes and does it again. There's actually been the Adam Walsh Act has been created because of this serial fiance visa sponsorer, because there's a lot of abuse. However, in that situation, the immigrant can actually go into civil proceeding and sue her ex-husband, saying, well, by signing this document, this affidavit of support, he was agreeing to support me. And most of the time it doesn't work, but there are a few attorneys in the country who specialize in these civil suits, and it's possible it can be used against the U.S. citizen spouse. So one of the ways that we work with family lawyers is to say, well, if you guys are really serious about this, but you're realistic that you may not be in love in a couple of years, why don't you look into getting a prenuptial agreement? And maybe she's got some assets now that she can transfer to you just in case you end up being on the hook that long for the affidavit of support.
You never told me that one. I like that. That's the first part of the piece of advice I got from you in a long time. I love that. You know what's interesting is I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but when I read that code, what I realized is that they can go into either state or federal court and seek relief. And I'm talking about the in most cases it's the wife for child and spousal support. And
Yeah.
I had a case where the woman came over. She had a 10-year-old daughter when she married my client. They were only together for about a year. She got tired of him, took off, and then needed support, went into a local family court and got both spousal support and child support for a kid that wasn't even his. And as you know, that liability could be up to 10 years, right? I mean, it's a pretty serious one. And I just find that fascinating. And like you said, I mean, the federal court doesn't really care, or the federal law doesn't care, right?
Not really.
Okay. Well, you talked about green cards, and I know that there's a term of art called a conditional versus a non-conditional green card. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. I'm sure the family lawyers come across this a lot, unfortunately. They need to ask the question, though, what kind of green card do you have? And usually you'll get a blank look from the immigrant. What do you mean? Well, a conditional green card is one that's only valid for 2 years. So if she doesn't file to remove the condition at the end of that 2 years to prove to immigration that she's still living with her US citizen spouse who got her the initial green card, then she could lose her green card. So when she files with her spouse to remove the condition, she's basically proving she still lives with him. It's still a bona fide marriage. There's financial commingling. There's proof of joint residency. She basically married him for non-immigration reasons. So a lot of people, they have joint bank accounts. They have joint residency proof at the initial green card interview. But as soon as they're done, she gets her green card. They stop commingling everything, and then 2 years later, it's like, we don't think your green card should be allowed to be turned into a regular 10-year card because we think that your marriage is fraudulent. So usually where this interacts in the family law context is she has a conditional green card, and after she got it, within months, her husband realized that she still needed him to remove that condition in a couple years. So he tightened the control, being more abusive, and would start using that in arguments. I'm not going to file to remove the condition on your green card. You're going to lose your green card. And a lot of the times, if she comes over with a young child, gets married to this US citizen, the young child is also being sponsored by the US citizen spouse. So the young child also has a conditional green card. So she doesn't want to pursue custody. She's worried about filing for divorce because he keeps threatening that he's not going to cooperate in removing the condition and turning it into a 10-year card. So what I tell them if they get to me early is say, look, you don't necessarily have to wait through 2 years of a bad marriage. Under the Violence Against Women Act, you may be able to file what's called a waiver, which means you don't have to have the cooperation of your spouse. You don't even have to be living with him anymore. But you can either show that he's been subjecting you and your child to extreme cruelty, so much like the abuse petition we were talking about before when someone's first applying for a green card, or she can prove that she got a final divorce decree and due to not her fault, the marriage just fell apart. She still has to prove that it was a real marriage, that there was all this commingling and for reasons not up to her. Maybe he was a cheater, maybe he left her. She can keep her green card. But in that kind of waiver, she has to have a final divorce decree. And as you know, better than anyone in California, divorce decrees can take a long time, even if they're uncontested, because of the statutory minimum provision that's got to sit there for 6 months before it can be final. Right. So what if her marriage falls apart at 1 year, 9 months, right? And after she gets her green card, she's got 3 months left on her green card and she hasn't filed for divorce yet, but it's not an abusive marriage. It's just a bad one. So, we have to really work with a family lawyer to figure out how we can do this, what we can file temporarily and maybe convert into a different type of waiver just to keep her in status. So it's really important when I tell my clients who come to me with conditional green cards, the first question I ask them, have you talked to a family lawyer yet? Do you know how long it's going to take in your state to get that divorce decree? Because most of the time they're waffling on whether or not they want to file for divorce. And I tell them, look, if you're not living with the guy anyways, this is going to give you one other ground for a waiver if you are divorced. But if you're not, you have very limited options.
You're just proving yourself again as to what tough cookie you are, boy. And you're so passionate about your work. I love it. So, this might come to a surprise to you, but sometimes I come across people that come over here and they get married to folks just to get in the United States. There are some fraudulent marriages.
No.
Yeah. I don't know if you have any commentary on that or not, but I just thought I'd throw that out to you. There was a recent appellate court decision that we dissected on a podcast, and it's fun because the guy came over and it was just a mess. But so I think we got to wrap it up, but I do want to know, why did you get into this area of law? You are so passionate about this. Most attorneys get into the area of law that they're in because there's something about their background,
Yeah.
A lot of family law attorneys had parents that were divorced, and they had some trouble in the family and they want to make things better for people. Why would a woman by the name of Heather Poole decide, It's immigration. And why would you become so passionate? You're the most passionate immigration attorney I've ever met. Tell me about that story.
Well, a long time ago, I was a student activist, and I realized that there's only so much I could do to change the system from outside. So that's why I went to law school to become a civil rights attorney. And I was planning on doing civil rights actions. I had even interned at a civil rights firm in Montgomery, Alabama, right? The heart of the civil rights movement. And it was my last elective course of law school with a favorite professor who taught immigration law. And I just realized through this and working for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission as an intern during law school, doing national origin discrimination cases, that immigrants are the population with the least amount of protection under the U.S. Constitution. So it really rang true with what I wanted to do, which is, protect people's rights. So that and getting a job before I even got out of law school, it was set in stone. And then the first immigration job I got, it was with a business immigration firm. But I told him, I'm only going to take this job if you give me all your hard luck cases, the cases you think you cannot win, your pro bono cases, the people who can't pay, so I can really figure out if I want to do this. And I just fell in love with it.
You are so confident. Most people are like, just give me a job. I just want to do anything. I love it. Okay. Well, Heather, I've really, really enjoyed this time. And I want to thank you for joining us. I think that our audience is just going to love this. Just thank you. I know that you're very busy. You took time out for us, and it's appreciated.
Oh, my pleasure. I got to say, I have so much respect for family lawyers. At least in my profession, most of the clients who come to me, they know what they have to do. They don't have a choice. But I know there's so much emotions in family law. What is that acronym that you see the best people at their worst because people are so emotional? Yeah. So I got total respect for what you do. I could never do what you do.
Well, thank you again, and thank you for joining us on Exhibit A, and see you next time.
For more information, visit us at PasadenaLawOffice.com.